Welcome to, well, something a little different from Combat Commander. As those of you who watch the channel, you're used to our monthly Welcome to the Combat Commander ladder. But we're going back to some of the basics that we've done here from a tutorial standpoint, and I want to revisit one of my favorite aspects of Combat Commander, and that is the random scenario generator. If you want to, I'm linking right up here in the video right now. The previous version of this, the Combat Commander Europe, or specifically the Mediterranean RSG process, did that 3 years ago, and that was such a great success that I had on the back burner decided that I really wanted to go through the Pacific with all the little differences and nuances that would come with that. And I finally have the opportunity, and I've got a great willing volunteer in Scott. I'm going to introduce Scott here in a minute, or rather let him introduce himself to you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the wonder that is the random scenario generator, Combat Commander, when it was originally created, was developed by Chad and Kai Jensen to be a random scenario generated product. And it was GMT that said, we really need you to create some scenarios to put in the box. So they rolled some up, essentially, slapped on some historical narrative to each of the scenarios, and released it to the general public. A significant portion of this, and I know Scott's going to back me up on this, the fun and enjoyment of the Combat Commander product is coming up with your own scenarios, and you can do that with this process. We've done it in Europe, and we're going to go through tonight the Pacific process. So we invite you to stick around, pull up a comfy chair, get in your jammies, whatever you want to do, and we're going to go step by step through this process, and hopefully we will dispel some of the myths and show you just how easy it is for you and your buddy to knock out a scenario in 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to talk through the whole process. So what you're seeing here is actually a bit longer and more involved just because it is a tutorial in all respects. But my partner in crime tonight is Scott. So Scott, welcome to the channel. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello. I guess I joined in the latter it's been over a year now, almost 2 years, a while. And with that, just started really playing a lot more Combat Commander. Started off with all the different scenarios, and then one night, me and one of my local friends were like, we should try the random scenario generator. And we were shocked at how balanced it was. Now, it may have helped that I think it was right around the time we did that French scenario with the tanks, which is the most unbalanced scenario I think that has ever been designed. But the more we did the random scenario generator after that, the more and more we realized that while the scenarios are their own unique set of fun, especially because they give you a historical flavor, context with that, and the little special rules that can make it kind of neat, the random scenario generator we have generally always found, no matter how bizarre the setup looks when we get to the point where all the pieces are on the map, that when we're done with it, we're like, that was incredibly balanced. That, both of us had a really, really good chance of winning that. Now, the cards may have screwed us up. But taking luck out of the equation, we couldn't look at either side and say, that side was just too unfairly situated in one way or another. Whereas in some of the scenarios, you sometimes get that, where you get a situation where the French are facing tanks, or there's a scenario where really one side there's a trick to being able to maybe do better, where if you don't figure out that trick, the scenario just doesn't work. The RSG doesn't have any of that. If there's some type of fault with it, it's usually because you set things up badly to begin. So we have generally found it to be a really great way to play the game. It's a lot of fun. It does take a little bit of prep work to start. Like you said, it might take about 20, 30 minutes for your first couple times doing this to get things set up. But the end result is so worth it because it's always been a good time. It lets you try unique, weird things. Just last night, I played a Europe random scenario generator where I decided to roll the dice and took an SS platoon, had all just a couple units and one leader, and using where you can buy extra units, ended up giving myself 3 heavy machine guns and but only one leader. Knowing that one leader got shot and taken out, I was doomed. But it was just a lot of fun. It was just so different. It lets you try and experiment with things that you just can't do with the scenarios.
I could not have said it any better. That was the perfect sales pitch, and I want to thank you for taking part in this, of course, but also just because I've seen you online now and you have become one of the major proponents of the RSG. You're out there pitching how much fun and how balanced it is, and I think for a lot of players, the balance factor is really it is the driving force for them that either drives them towards Combat Commander or keeps them shied away from it. One thing that you did say that specifically mentioned the fact that if you have a bad game, it's probably because you didn't set things up right. And I think that's especially true for me. That's in any game of Combat Commander. But one of the most difficult aspects of any of this, the pre-printed historical scenarios in there, is that they've been played so much now over nearly 20 years that some of them do have a trick, exactly as you said. It's something you got a little factor that you've got to either exploit or figure out or something to go on. So now that everybody's played these scenarios, some people are just better at exploiting them, and I typically in those scenarios the better player is going to win out. But in an RSG scenario, the world is your oyster. You have no idea, and because of that balancing factor on the equation, as we're going to see, it really does come down to some very tense, wonderful experiences. Shoot, from a developer standpoint, if you are just, we always talk about the narrative in Combat Commander, but even just if you're making up your own scenarios here, then that might drive your mind to say, oh, it was the darkest jungles of New Guinea, and you're coming up with a scenario about the Anzacs versus the Japanese, and you can really put your own particular historical spin on it, and, it adds to it. I mean, it really does. So we're here, and we are hoping that you are going to and get something out of this, and we would love to hear all of your feedback. So that's what the comment section down there below the YouTube video is for. Please, if you found that we missed something, certainly point that out. It will benefit everybody, but we really want to engage with you and just hear what you have to say about it. So here is hoping that you have as much fun as we're going to have tonight, and we're going to just take this by the paces. We'll talk out through each process. So first we start with the blank canvas right here. Exactly. I love that there's a gray box here. It says, once you're familiar with the 12 published scenarios included in this game, you may wish to try your hand at playing some randomly generated games. Using the following method, you will end up with an historically plausible battle utilizing simultaneously selected forces and secret objectives. Again, this is going to be very similar to what we did in the European module. There are just a couple of little tweaks that I found when I was reading this earlier that they do to make it even more balanced or more plausible because of factors involved with the Pacific Theater of Operations. So strap in, here we go. First step is we have to find out what battlefield we're on. Typically, one player, if you're sitting face to face, will make a roll. On even, that person selects a map, and if it's odd, the other person does. But as my guest, I'm going to give Scott the capability to choose a map. We've got 12 from the base Pacific, and then we've got 6 more from New Guinea. I've got them loaded in here. So we've got anything from A through J, I think, and M1 through M6. So if you have a particular preference, sing out, let me know, and we'll start a new one here.
Why don't we go with J?
J, all the way to J. All right. Let's go with a new game here. I'm going to set this up as an observer, and we're going to select board J. That was easy. Okay, and so that is there. I'm going to leave our Axis and Allied orders of battles out there. We don't know who's going to be involved with this one, but we at least have a nice big hill here, and with some jungle on the fringes. So I think this is a fine, fine map. I guess since you picked J, then I will make a roll, and I'm going to decide which side of the map is now facing me based on the hex assignments down here at the bottom. So I'll draw a card. Okay, so now I can pick either 3 or 1 as my map side. So if I pick 3, it's going to be the right side that I'm on, or I could take the top of the map. I think I'm going to I'll take the right side here. So this will be my edge, and then the left side will be Scott's edge. All right. We've got the time track is set to 0. We don't know how long the game is going to be. That will be determined later. And the victory points are currently set at 0 as well. I've got the cards out already, so I'll make a roll. On an even roll, I will play the Japanese, and on an odd roll, I'll play the Allies. So here's the roll for that. It's an even roll, so I will be playing the Japanese. So timely that I have picked the Japanese deck. Now I need to find out who Scott is going to be playing. And there's a really neat, I don't know if you've looked at it carefully, but the distribution on the U.S. versus the Commonwealth is really quite interesting on this. And the way they've got it scattered between 1943 and then 1942 on the extremes with a little smattering of this and that. So it's really quite cool. But I'm going to find out who I am going to be facing in Scott. So here's a roll for that. And it's a 6 as well. And it is 1943, and Scott will be playing the U.S. forces. So I'm going to set the year here to 1943. And he's switched to U.S., and I'll bring out his order of battle. And we'll just put that out for a second as well. All right.
One thing that we should note here that's different than anyone who's done the Europe is depending on what year it is, we'll actually adjust the victory points at this stage of the game.
Exactly. And it's neat because we hit 1943, so there is no shift. If it had been 1942, it would have moved one space towards the Allied. If it was 1944, it would be 2 spaces towards the Japanese. Or if it was 1945, it'd be 4 spaces in victory points towards. So they would start with a little bit of a bonus. I think that's great. And it even has a little note there to help balance it out based on some of the external factors that were occurring at that point in the war. So we have now determined our sides. We have Axis and Allies selected. We move on to step 3 now, troop quality. I will now determine my order of battle quality. So 1943 is the column I'm looking at, and I get a 3, which is elite. Very interesting. So I'm going to move mine to the elite status here for a moment. And you, sir, can determine your U.S. troop quality.
All right, got a 6. 2 to 6 in 43
Also
is
elite.
also elite.
Wow, this is going to be a dust up. Step 4 now, we determine what our initial objectives are. So I'm going to scroll down here. If you'd like, you can go ahead and pull the open objective, and then we will each pick one secret one. And my secret. All right. So objectives have been determined. We move on now to what our orders of battle are, but essentially each one of us are going to take one of our cards. I've got the Japanese, he's got the Americans, and we are going to look at the matching columns that allow for elite in 1943, and there are usually 2 or 3 columns in each one of the groupings. And then from that, we determine how big, how many victory points we're willing to cede to the other player, either from a very large company to a detachment down to a small platoon. So depending on how much we want to bring onto the map is really just dependent on the metagame part of how many points do I want to give away to my opponent, and then that will be offset by what he gives back to me. So I'm going to pause it here while we think, and then what we will do is we'll come back and we will do 1, 2, 3 and indicate what our choices are simultaneously as we would do if we were at the table. We have both selected what we want, and we're both going to, on the count of 3, reveal them. So 3, 2, 1. Okay. So first, the Japanese gives his points over. So I've selected a Taishintai detachment, and I'm going to give the Americans 22 victory points. So do Control 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 2. There you go. There's 22 victory points.
And it's going to go 18 back your way from what I chose. 6, 12, and 18.
Perfect. For the moment, the victory points are sitting on Scott's side. So the Americans, if nothing else changes here momentarily, will be possibly the defenders. But first we got to select our leaders. We got a leader section here, or depending on what we selected, so I will get 2 leaders. How many leaders are you going to get?
I get 2 leaders as well.
Makes about sense. We both went middle of the road here. So I will do my Japanese leaders first. I'm going to get a +1 to my roll because we are elite. and a -1 because we're in 1943, so they will offset. So
We're
I
just going to use the white number on whatever card you pull.
white number on the card. Yeah. So here's
All
the
right.
first one for me is a 3. So I'm going to get Sergeant Conborough, and then the second one is a 6. I'm going to get Sergeant Nakasone.
And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and pull from mine. So I got a 3, so that'll be Sergeant Scott as it should be.
Of course.
We'll drop him over here on the board, and then pull another card. 4 will be Sergeant Young.
Okay. So at this point, what we can do before we move on any farther into our support roles, I'm going to pause the recording here. We're going to pull every one of the required pieces over into our order of battle and get that squared away. And then we'll come back and do our required support roles. Both Scott and I have completed the assembly of our Axis and Allied orders of battle. And now comes my favorite part of all of this. It's the support roles. This is the metagame part that I was talking about. Because the current victory points are sitting on Scott's side at 4, Scott is compelled to make a support roll, and he must purchase at least one, but up to as many as he likes, of a support weapon, squad, anything that's on his order battle card that matches the year and the die roll that he's made. I've reset both of our decks, so it is over to you, sir.
Roll is a 10 for 43. I can get a bar team, I can get a rifle marine squad, or a garrison squad. And so this is kind of one of those head down moments where you start thinking, how much of my points do I want to give up? And I can give up more than I've got. I can push things to your side.
Yes.
And I think one thing which you might want to mention here is part of the metagame on this is also where we're going to be thinking about, do I want to be defending? Do I want to be the attacker? Do I want us to be in a recon position? Because while there are some unique rules here for the Japanese as to whether or not although I guess if you were going to be bonsai, you had to pick a bonsai order of battle.
True. I would have had to have done that already.
So we don't have that. But eventually, when we get through the points, that if we're whatever side has points, will, as you said earlier, be the defender. The one who does not currently have a point lead will be attacked, unless we're at 0, in which case then we are both on recon. So part of when you're purchasing things is how much do I want to buy? And if you really want to try and make sure that you're either buy a bunch of stuff, but just enough to make it that you could still end up on a recon or be with the point lead, you can make sure that your opponent has 1 point, because then they have to also make a support roll and buy at least one thing from their support table. So as we said earlier, this is where kind of the meta gets into it, where how do I play the game and set the scenario up so that it can be the way I want it to be.
And certainly having the left side of the map where you've got all that high ground, that I'm sure will factor into your consideration about, well, if I want to
Very
be a
much
defender.
so.
Yeah. I have the high
Yes.
ground down at Kenton.
Although, again, having the high ground coming in and attacking isn't too bad either. Well, I'm going to think about this, so give me just a moment. All right, good time to talk.
Take as much time as you wish.
It's interesting that the bar team that I can get does not actually come with weapons. It's like, oh, no, wait, no weapons. I think I am going to, okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to purchase 2 bar marine squads, which would cost me a total of 4 points, which at this point would have us sitting right on top of each other, being even. But then to make sure that you get to make a roll too, I'm going to let you actually have a little bit of choice in the matter. I'm going to purchase a 3rd bar marine squad. So at this point, the Axis gets 6 points. You'll have to make a roll, but it gives you the more interesting options of being able to play that game to figure out what
Sure.
side you want to be on.
I always love to go shopping, so let me turn to my support table here, and I will roll on the table. I have a 5. So in 1943, I could get Sergeant Saito for 4 victory points, or I could get an SNLF squad for 1 point. So I have to buy something. Now this is where I'm going to look ahead to the defensive purchasing here, just briefly. If I have 1 point remaining, I could only buy 3 foxholes, which isn't great. So there's really no incentive for me. I'm just going to buy, I think, 2 SNLF squads at 1 point each, and that will bring us back into balance. So I'll pull those down here. Now, it is important to note, the reason I put these down here separate is because when I set up these units, per these RSG rules, they cannot hold any of these order of battle squad-based weapons that were given based on the column that I chose. So they are separate from that, and that's why I have to make sure that they do not get handed any squad weapons. But I will now give Scott 2 allied VP and bring us back to 0. This game is so balanced. So now we gather up our purchased weapons, we've placed them aside, and now we determine what our posture is in RS Step 8. And I did not pick a bonsai force during Step 5, so I don't have to worry about that. In all other cases, normally whoever had the victory points on their side would become the defender by default. And in this case, we're at 0, so we're both going to be in a recon posture, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to set mine over here to recon. And he's got his set to recon. And that means we'll have a slightly different order of setup here. And we don't have any amphibious assaults or river crossings, so we don't have to sweat that out. And we don't have fortifications because there is no defender. So we get to skip Step 9 completely. We can also skip Step 10 because there is no defender. And we have no attacker. So we skip Step 11. And we could skip Step 12 because we have no invader. And that means that brings us to the recon setup. In this case, we can go 6 hexes deep because we're in the narrow orientation here, which is kind of nice. The higher initiative is the one that we'll get to set up first. So my initiative in this case was a 5. What was yours?
Mine was an 8,
Okay,
which
so
does mean I start with the initiative card.
correct.
So I'll go ahead and
take that.
you sent that over to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing we also might want to do at this point is change up on the order of battle. How many orders each of us have? Because that is also determined by the order of battles that we chose.
Yes.
And in my situation, I think we're both 3. Mine is 3.
Mine is also 3. And we're both elite, so you can put that stack right there.
There we go.
Okay.
And one other thing, even though we skipped over it, one thing that's important to note, if you're doing the RSG and you are the defender and you've purchased fortifications, is you set them up last. So the defender will set up first, then the attacker would set up, and then the defender would see what does everything on the board look like, and then choose where to put those fortifications, which is important because those fortifications aren't necessarily foxholes or bunkers or trenches, but could be mines, could be wire. And if you want to spend a whole bunch of points, if you got the points to spend, you can even get mines that are the really good minefields that aren't the default 6, but instead are either 7 or 8 firepower mines. And I think Japan has a special booby traps where they have a mix of wire and mines that they can put in.
Yeah, that's a nice difference from Europe. I looked at that one. I was like, oh, okay. For the bargain basement price, you can get a little bit of everything. So that seems like it's got some good possibilities for the future.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're going to do right now, normally we would do our setup and then we would complete all the steps to determine all of the sudden death and everything, and we can certainly do that. But since we're gonna pause this here, or we're gonna save this at this point, this will be our setup process that we would do when we start to play through this. So I want to have this here so that the second time we play through, the opposite player can then make some new choices if they wish based on the order of battle that's available to them. Let me just do save game as here. So we're going to skip that process for the moment, and we can, of course, there's no bonsai and there are no fortifications to set up, like Scott was saying. That goes after all of the units have been placed on the map. The Japanese player does have the opportunity here for infiltrators, and what we'll do is the first time we play this, when I take the Japanese, of course, I will make that decision prior to game time, and I can spend some victory points to put them, actually I can pick up to 3 of my units that are in my order of battle and put them into these infiltration tracks, and they have to maintain the stacking limitations, of course. So that will also give me the opportunity to purchase, if I wish, some sighting markers for the map, and then I will give some points to Scott for that, or each side. So we'll do that right before we actually play. Step 17 is day or night. We don't have to worry about nighttime because the Japanese are not in a bonsai attack or invasion posture. So because we're both in recon, it is going to default to daytime. So the rest just becomes setting up the control markers. The defender would normally get all of the markers on the map, except for the ones that any attacker places into. But in this case here, it will be based on wherever we put our units 6 deep. So if we place them into one of the objective locations, then we will flip them over at that time right before we start the game. The time marker does start at 0 because we have 6 total orders. That means, for the moment, our sudden death is going to be at 6. That can modify if neither player has the recon posture, then you would move up to the next higher space if the map is oriented narrow to because of that east-west amount of time it takes to cross that map. Or you would move it down. But because we're in recon, then we keep it exactly as it is. They want us to hustle, hustle, hustle across this map. Surrender marker for the Americans is, what is that surrender?
My surrender is 9.
Okay, so I'll let you go ahead and set that. We don't have any mines. We've got a fresh coffee cup for our smoke markers. Prior to the start of the game, Japanese can purchase up to 8 sighting markers at a price of 1 victory point each. So there's another little part of the metagame where you decide whether or not you wish to have a whole bunch of possibilities, depending on what you put into the infiltration track, or if you just have a couple of them, then maybe just spend a couple of points for that. But of course, you're giving them away to the Americans. The initiative card has already been passed. That's the last step here for step 19. The Americans have it because they have the higher initiative. And we would now shuffle up our decks, which I believe I went through and, reshuffled both of our decks. So we are ready to go. This is H hour. What do you think of all this now that you've done this one time from the Pacific point of view?
I mean, there are little nuances that are different from Europe, and I'm curious to see how those will play out. I like the idea, because unless I've played Europe wrong, and I've played many things wrong before, I don't think that there's the shift in the sudden death based off the orientation of the map. I think that's unique to Pacific, isn't it?
Yeah, there is not. That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that was one of
And
the
I
things.
think that's a neat little change. The other thing, I mean, being able to choose whether it's night or not, that's not enough. It's always during the day. I guess you could agree when you're going into it, and like let's put night rules in for fun, or Normandy rules, or whatever you want to do. But that's actually worked into the rules here that the Japanese player gets those choices is very interesting. Um, One thing that I would note for people watching this that are thinking, do I want to do this one? Do I want to do the Europe one? If you're using Vassal, as all of us in the ladder generally do, the Europe module, you can get an extension for it that will actually give you a button that is an RSG button. And when you push it, most of the stuff that we did about picking sides, about picking map orientation, it will do all that for you. It'll just spit out that, okay, Scott is the Germans, the Allies are the French or whoever. It'll give you the line quality, so whether you're elite, line, green, it gives you all those little roles that we had to do here. There's one button in the Europe module that will do that all for you. And while I know that people on the Discord have been saying, "Oh, Scott can fix things in the Vassal modules," I am very much just poking little tiny simple buttons and seeing what happens. I certainly am not the level of creating a new RSG for Pacific. So maybe we can go beg the person who originally did this, who I think kind of gave up on doing Vassal stuff. Maybe we can beg them to do it for Pacific as well. But for now, for Pacific, you're going to have to go through a couple little steps, just pulling the cards. It's not a big deal.
No, not
But
at all.
the Europe one will actually, you can push a button and it'll do all the stuff that's very procedural for you, and then just leaves you to picking your orders of battle and so forth.
Now, admittedly, we got to skip at least 4 or 5 steps just by being in recon posture. But all told, even where I paused the recording here, the official recording on this when we finished was right at 30 minutes. And you figure, I think maybe Scott and I mulled for 2 to 3 minutes when I paused recording and then putting the stuff over into our orders of battle. So this whole process, if it takes you 45 minutes on your first try, that is probably the very top end of it, unless you're really getting some metagaming or analysis paralysis in your process. But I think it's very simple to do. I hope this will at least encourage people to just get in there and try, because it is going to be. I cannot wait to see what happens when we do this. So I'm going to save this game.
Before we jump off, one thing I'll add to that: if this is your first time trying it, don't overthink it. Pick randomly. If you've got 6 choices, roll a d6. Whatever it takes, just pick randomly, because where you saw us playing with the victory points or shifted one way and then back the other is going to give you a lot of ways to balance things. That it gives you the choice that, do I want to have my little tiny weak force and hopefully hole up and turtle and keep myself nice and safe in a bunker, or do I want to buy those extra parts so I can be more aggressive? It gives you those choices to do that with those support roles. So really, I mean, I've done this again. This is the first time for Pacific, but I've done Europe so many times, and I've seen 2 large forces go at each other. I've seen a large versus a small, every combination, and they've always worked out. It's always worked out because of the way those points and that balance comes into things. Really, really works out. Even if you've got a giant group of elites versus a little tiny group of green guys, there's going to be such a huge point swing that you really are going to be able to have a good time with it, and it's not going to be a complete and total steamroll. Unless, of course, the cards hate you, which is often happens.
Yes, that's why they watch this channel, of course. But I'm just looking at our order of battle now that we've got them side by side. I mean, with the exception of my Betsudotai that have the extra melee +1, we're pretty balanced. I don't have as well of good range because your rifle marine have an extensive range, so you've got a little bit more reach out and tickle you kind of thing. But on the whole, not too bad. I think you've got a little bit better leadership, of course. But I have a scout, I've got some mortars, I have the opportunity to pop some smoke, so I can kind of obscure my approach a little bit here. I'm very keen to see what's going to happen and how I place everything in those first 6 hexes. So, Scott, thank you very much for going through this process here.
Absolutely.
Everyone that's out there, stay tuned. We're going to set this up, and he and I are going to play through this. So we'll have that one as a recorded video, and then we're going to swap sides and do it a second time. So we hope you found this enjoyable tonight. Please take a moment, click that like and subscribe, as I ask you on every video. That helps support the channel a little bit and at least gets that YouTube visibility, which is what I'm so desperate for. I need the attention. If you are watching this because you enjoy Combat Commander, but you didn't know I have other content out there, I've got a Combat Commander playlist that I'm showing you right now, so feel free to click on that. And that's all the videos for the ladder. And of course, it would not be a Combat Commander video if I didn't invite you to come join the Combat Commander ladder. The information is linked below in the description here. So if this is a new concept to you and you'd like to get into some very friendly competitive play, we have a Discord server and we have about 100 players at any given time. And if you're brand spanking new to either Combat Commander Europe or Pacific, come on in. We would love to have you on the ladder, and we will certainly bring you up to speed. So, Scott, we will set this up offline, and I look forward to looking up that hill at you.
And for anyone who's debating whether or not to join the ladder, like Patrick just said, it's an incredibly friendly group. You can almost always find somebody almost any time of day who is ready to just jump into a random game with you. And because of the ladder, I realized I've been playing on the ladder for just about 18 months. During those 18 months, I went from having played Combat Commander maybe a handful of times to just this past weekend I played my 100th game.
Congratulations. That's a heck of a landmark. I've played 100 games and I'm not getting any better, but that's okay.
I didn't say I was getting better. I just said I got to play a lot.
The experience is worth its weight to go. Well, Scott, I will talk to you soon, and everybody, we hope to see you next time.